What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh video, back with another Dad Return format video. This format is sort of a format that's very polarizing to people because it's near the end of the GX era, and it's really where the game sort of takes off and becomes a lot more combo-oriented. Of course, won't reach the levels of modern Yu-Gi-Oh for quite some time, but this is sort of where the game really picks up speed and changes, basically forever. And so this is a format that not everyone likes, but it is a very interesting format, and there's still a lot of interesting things that you can do inside it. Now, the format's dominated by Dad Return decks, which are basically decks that are using Dark Arm Dragon, which is at 3 copies in this format for some reason, to just blow out their opponent, banish a bunch of things, bring them back with Dim Fuse, things like that. But there are some other things that you can do potentially with the new Phantom Darkness card, Phantom of Chaos. Now, if you're familiar with Eden's format at all, you know that Phantom of Chaos Norleras is a deck that has seen some play in that format. It's sort of like a rogue option there. And so, the idea behind this deck, which was created by Soul Emerald 69, who played in the most recent Dad Return format tournament that was held on the YGO from Zero Discord server, linked in the description down below if you want to join that. They managed to actually get top 8 with this thing. Now, to be clear, this was a relatively small tournament. It was only had like 24 or so people in it. So, topping this, while it still is impressive, is not like topping a 100-person event and stuff. So who knows if we increase the numbers, whether this sort of deck would actually be able to still top. But it still is interesting that they managed to do so well with it, so I wanted to try it out for myself and see what I think about the deck. Now, an important thing to note here is that it's not just Norleras and Phantom of Chaos. You also have Dark Creator, which is another very cool card from the Phantom Darkness, which you can basically bring out similar to Dad, except Dark Creator, it just needs 5 or more Darks in your graveyard while you control no monsters, and then you get to bring this thing out, and it can basically revive other Dark monsters for you. So this thing is pretty good. And I think, honestly, this is a better payoff for the deck than something like Sky Score's Norleras here. Because, I feel like this deck doesn't really top deck the best, honestly, compared to some of the other decks in the format. But if you do pull off Norleras' effect, which is basically pay 1,000 life points, send all cards on the field and in both players' hands to the graveyard, and then you draw a card. If you manage to pull off that effect, it can really mess up your opponent's plays as well. For instance, it can mess up their dark count for Dark Arm Dragon and things like that. So that is another sort of powerful feature of this deck. But I will say that I do have some complaints with how this deck is built, which I'll get into going through the card by card. So let's just do that right now. We got triple Dad, double Greffer. This it's pretty standard. Demok here as well, double Dasher, Disc Commander, double Mally, a Plasma here to pair with the trade-ins, a Stratos to search out any of your heroes, triple Phantom of Chaos because that's sort of the beating heart of this deck if you want to go lean in on the Norleras stuff. You got Sangan here as well to search out the Phantom of Chaoses, or the Disc Commander, or the Snipe Hunter, which can be used to offload dead cards in hand, fill up your graveyard with Darks for Dark Creator, and also potentially pop your opponent's stuff. And then triple Dark Creator, because this thing is really good if it comes out. It's also a level 8 for the trade-ins there. We've got a bunch of draw power as well. Triple Allure, triple Trade-In, triple Upstart, triple D-Draw, and a Card Destruction as well. Card Destruction also has the added benefit of potentially messing up your opponent's dark count, so that's another nice thing about it. We got a Dim Fuse here to bring back our monsters from the bench zone, and we will have a fair bit of those most of the time. We got Heavy Storm to blow out our opponent's back row, Reborn to revive our stuff and our opponent's things, MST to blow out our opponent's back row as well, Premat to bring back our stuff, Double Rotor to search out the Greffers or the Stratos, or in weird cases, potentially the Disc Commander, but generally using this to search out a Greffer or a Stratos, depending on what you need at the time. And then for the traps, we got a Crush Card Virus and a Return for the Different Dimension. Now, 45 cards is a choice on Soul's part. I think the main reason why they went for it is because they're figuring, okay, I don't necessarily want to draw the Norlerases. I'd rather have them in deck to send for Greffer. And so I think that's why they went with that. But I feel like it's not really that big of a deal in this deck, given you're playing the trade-ins, right? And the trade-ins want things like Norleras in the hand to actually pitch and draw more, right? And Greffer also kind of wants the Norleras in hand because you pitch it, get a free special, and then you can send more stuff. So honestly, I feel like this deck could probably be cut down to, less cards than this. I'm not saying maybe you have to go exactly 40, but I do think that these upstarts here don't really do much for the deck because, generally you want upstart in a deck that's over 40 cards if you've got a very clear way to search out what you need and you don't necessarily want to draw that thing. But as I mentioned, this deck doesn't really mind if it draws Norleras, or at least I feel like it probably doesn't because it is playing the trade-ins here to pitch it, right? Or the Greffer to pitch it, or a variety of things to pitch it, like card destruction as well. So, I personally feel like these upstarts are not really worth it in the deck. And honestly, the more room could probably be found to cut this thing down to 40 as well. But I also think another sort of inclusion to this deck that just after playing it a little bit, I think would be really good here is Necrogardna. I think Necrogardna is a card that, it was in some of the, really well-performing lists in this event. I think it actually is very good for this deck in particular because I think it fixes an issue that I mentioned where like the deck can suffer from top decking poorly. So if you put yourself into a low resource situation with Norleras, you kind of want as many tools as possible to actually get advantage out of that. And if you're playing Necrogardnas, then you're able to have that engrave as sort of another resource to use when you are in those low situations. So I do think that Necrogardna would be another good inclusion in this deck. I'm not sure where you'd fit it or what you'd cut, but I'm just sort of spitballing more ideas for it because I do think it's a very interesting deck list, and I feel like it's something that people could continue to iterate on in the future. Those are just sort of my complaints with this initial build of it, but still very, very, cool stuff that Soul brought here. Kudos to them for actually building it and bringing it to an event and actually doing pretty well with it. So moving on to the side deck, we got double Sidra, I guess, to get more aggressive if we're going second. We got double Kaiku here. Kaiku is actually a pretty interesting card here because it is very good at stopping DD Crows, which actually does cause this deck a lot of problems. Now, DD Crow causes the regular dad return decks a lot of problems as well, but especially for this deck, there's a lot of stuff you don't want your opponent to crow. If you summon out a Phantom of Chaos, try to use its effect, and they crow the monster that you're trying to, banish to use the effect of, then you won't actually be able to get the Phantom of Chaos effect off. So, you basically just summoned out a 0/0 guy for no value, and then your opponent can just run it over next turn. So that is a disastrous scenario. So having the Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer on field before you do that can potentially help you out there. But I will say that it is kind of awkward sometimes because you have to normal summon the Kaiku and then you normal summon the Phantom of Chaos in the following turn. And if you've got the board presence to keep that Kaiku on your side of the field and then normal summon Phantom of Chaos, you don't necessarily want to go for Norleras and wipe the board because you're probably in a better spot than your opponent is there. So that's another sort of interesting thing about this. But at the very least, you can banish like a dad, and that's pretty good for this deck here. Because if you got Phantom of Chaos banishing a dad, then you can just blow up your opponent's entire field and get a lot of value that way. So I think honestly, like in this format, like I know that the Norleras stuff comes over from Medicine. Norleras is a cool card, but I think honestly, like the Norleras could probably be cut here just because you have the dads already, and you don't really need the Norleras pop if you can just have triple dad to make getting dad into the graveyard a lot more consistent and then pairing it with the Phantom Chaoses. But that's just sort of like my sort of take on the deck, but I have not played this deck as much as Soul Emerald, so they're definitely the one to default to there. Triple Crow, just for, dad decks and other decks that use the graveyard. Braincon, Minecon, these can be especially good if you're up against Cyber Valley variants of dad return, so you just take their valleys, banish your own stuff, and then get 2 draws, so that's very nice. Double Dust Tornado and Double Royal Decree for more back row-oriented decks. We also have Skill Drains here. I don't know when you bring in Skill Drain because I feel like this deck depends a lot on its effects going off. But I guess if you can just stick a creator or stick a dad, like he's just a big guy that you can just bring out very easily. So you can just sort of rely on the attack there to carry you home. So I guess that's why these are in here. But yeah, very, very cool deck. The Fusion deck is not here for doing anything really. They're technically weird edge cases with like Heraclinos or Gaio Diaz or something, but like realistically, you're never going into this thing. So it's just here to sort of obfuscate what you're on in like the game one. But that's going to do it for the deck breakdown. Let's dive into some games and see how this deck actually plays. Okay, we got a game here against PJ Darkness, a frequent guest on the channel. Always a pleasure to have them on. We are playing Norleras, and they're playing, well, it's unknown to us here, but we'll see what they're playing as time goes on. And we've got a pretty interesting hand here. We've got Mali for the D-draw, so that's very nice. We have Rhoda to search out a Stratos or potentially a Grepher if we want to. And we have card destruction to potentially mess up our opponent's dark count turn 1. Although with this hand exactly, I don't really think we necessarily want to go for the card destruction just yet. But, if we have the blind read that our opponent's on dad return, which they likely are, and then we just want to potentially mess up their dark count, then this is something we could do, but that probably is, worse for us than better. So we're going to start with the D-draw just to sort of get an inkling of what we're working with here and what we can do. We draw into dad and the dark creator here. So we've got a lot of dark setup. So I think I want to use that Rhoda on a Grepher. We can actually potentially use the Grepher this turn, rotoing out the Grepher, summoning that out, pitching probably the Norleras because we kind of want that in grave, and then sending another dark to grave. However, I feel like that's a bit risky because while we can banish Mali to, get that out of grave, get 3 darks back in grave with the dad, I do feel like it just leaves us a bit vulnerable. It's not really the best setup, and that's part of why I like Necrogardna in this deck a lot because, I feel a lot more comfortable if I can go Rhoda for Grepher, summon that out, pitch the Norleras, pitch a Necrogardna to the grave, and then have that there in case our opponent does a big, big play. I could probably still do the Greffer play. That probably is the right move because, again, if they attack over the Greffer, then I can just banish Mally on my following turn, bring out another Mally. There is the risk of drawing into Mally, but one Mally out of 37 cards is not the most likely sort of scenario happening here. And yeah, I mean, I'm not establishing the dad this turn no matter what. That's definitely off the table because BrainCon or just a variety of board breakers that my opponent could have could basically, maybe so I bring out dad and then nothing happens with it. But probably is best to go for Rhoda here. But I'm like, okay, well, I can save Rhoda for next turn and get the Greffer online there. So I can sort of just use that. But I don't quite know if that's the right choice or not. So we'll have to see. I just said an MST here, pass back to my opponent, see what they do. And they're going to go for a D-draw of their own, pitching a Disc Commander. That's a bit worrying because they potentially revive that, get a draw in there, and be a bit annoying there. They're going to go for an Allure, banish a Dad from hand. So that is good for us because I feel like that means that they don't necessarily have a way to get Dads online unless they've just got a ton of Dads in hand already. And they're like, I don't need this other one. They're going to go for MST on our back row, which is just the MST. So MST baiting out MST there. Then they're going to go for Stratos searching on a Mally. So they might have another D-draw in hand. And it looks like they do need to have that other D-draw in hand. So they're going to draw 2 more there. Then they're going to go for an upstart. So we will gain 1,000. That is very nice because it means that our opponent has a harder time of OTKing us this turn if they can. And then they're going to go for a Mally of their own, bring out another Mally, and then they're going to attack in for 2,600. This is a little bit worrying because they could have Crush Guard Virus here, and that might be why they're getting aggressive with this Mally. They could be trying to get aggressive, though, and that is an option as well. They're going to Crow our Mally here, get another Dark Engraved, so they got 2 Darks there. And then they're going to set 1 and pass back to us. So I'm very, very worried that they've got a Crush card, but we only really have one play here, and that's to go Rhoda for a Greffer and just try and get our things happening. So we go Rhoda for Greffer, and unfortunately they do have a Mind Crush, so that will hit that Greffer away. And if I'd gone for the Greffer setup last turn, then I potentially would have been able to avoid this and, you know, had the setup engraved for a Dark Arm Dragon. Of course, they did have the Crow, so that would mess up a little bit there. But, you know, they probably would have left the Mally engraved. So we would have gone, yeah, so I think they would have still had us here, like, or had us in a spot where we couldn't really do much. Because what we would have done is we would have set up our grave with Greffer, right? And then, you know, on our turn, we would have gone, you know, Mally effect to banish the Mally to get 3 Darks down in grave. And then they would have gone Crow, banish one of our other things. So probably the Norleras. And then we would have had 2 Darks in grave and a Mally on field. So we still would have been able to go Mally, crash into their Mally, and then bring out Dad in main phase 2 to pop their Stratos. But that's a bit worse of an outcome for us than it would have been otherwise. So still, they'd have to have a way to deal with the Dad. So I don't necessarily think it would have been bad to go for the Greffer there. And I think it probably would have been the right choice to do. But it's tough to know what to do exactly with these decks. Anyways, we're going to go for card destruction, try and dig for something else here. We really don't have the tools to actually bring out any of these guys here. And we're in a bit of a vulnerable spot. So we also hope that this disrupts what they've got. So potentially puts them over 3 Darks. And it does indeed put them over 3 Darks. So I feel good about that. We're drawing to a Dad, a Greffer, a Heavy Storm, and Trade-In. Unfortunately, that Dad is now dead, given that we've got a ton of Darks in grave. We got 5 in there to be exact. Now, we can potentially fix our graveyard later, potentially if we go for a Dark Creator. And, you know, bring that out, you know, summon back a card from our graveyard, get down to 3, and then bring out Dad. But that's a bit further down the line. So I could special Greffer here. There's not really a point to that, though. So I'm just going to normal summon out the Greffer. Think about this for a bit, but I'm going to normal summon out the Greffer. And then I'm just going to use the effect, pitch the Dad, and then thin out my deck a little bit because I want the Dasher engraved to special something out. So, you know, if I draw into like Demock or one of my, you know, big level monsters, which I do have a fair bit of, this gives me a way to bring it out from the deck. And also this makes it less likely that I'm going to just top deck a Dasher, right? Because I only have 1 Dark Creator left in deck. So it's a bit tough to actually get into that sort of game state. But I maybe should have held the Dad just in case I drawn to like Phantom of Chaos or other things, potentially sort of thin out my graveyard a little bit more. But I feel like given we've only got a Heavy Storm and a Trade-In, it's not likely that we're going to get into that. So I feel like this is the better choice. And I do stand by this choice. I think it is the better choice. It's really tough to thin down the grave from this amount. Just like given the layout of my graveyard. If I had more Dark Creators, I probably wouldn't have done this. But since I do have 2 in grave, I do think it's good to do. They're going to go for a Lure, banish a Demock, and that is a bit scary. If they've got like a Dim Fuse or something, that's going to be really bad for us. They go for a Trooper here, milling 3, milling a Reborn as well, so I feel good about that because that means they don't have Reborn to get even more aggressive here. And they're going to go for Dim Fuse, though. So they did have the Dim Fuse, and now they've got Reborn potentially to bring something else back, so that is going to be very concerning for us. They're going to go for the Demok there, add back the Reborn. And then they have a lot of different options here that they could go for. I think most of which do kill us here. If they go for Reborn, target the Dasher, they can potentially tribute the Mally and get the Dasher up to 3,100. They attack to our Mally with the Stratos, attack over our Gruffer with the Trooper. That's 200 there. 200 plus 31, so that's 33, plus 28. So actually, that's not quite lethal. It's 300 off, but it's still very good. So, yeah, I don't know what the best outcome is here for them. I mean, they could also just reborn their own Disc Commander, so that is an option as well. And I think that is the option that they're going to do. So they're going to go for the reborn on the Disc Commander because they can't get a lethal line here. So maybe they draw into like a crush card or something else to make our life miserable. Which I do think is the smart thing for them because as I laid out, I don't think they have a way to get lethal here. I could be wrong, and let me know down in the comments below if there actually was a way to, put me down to lethal here. But I think that given that they normal summoned already and given the layouts of the graveyards, it wouldn't really work out that way. Since it is dim fused, the monsters brought back by it do stick around, so they will still be there. And I'm going to need a pretty good draw on my own here, and Dad is not really that good draw, and that is a bit concerning. We go for a heavy storm here, just clear the back row, see what it was, get more information. They go for crush card, and we're just going to scoop it up and go to game 2 because we don't want to reveal our hand there. So, yeah, that was a rough one. I think it shows one of the flaws of this deck where, like, you do play a fair amount of bricks. Like, if you don't have the setup for the things in hand, it can be a bit awkward. Yes, there are ways to maneuver your graveyard to get to different points like that. And if I'd gone for the Gruffer setup first thing, it would have turned out maybe differently. But I feel like, again, as I mentioned, we would have been in a kind of tough spot there. And yeah, like, I don't think it really would have changed anything because even with the Gruffer setup, given their following turn, as I mentioned, we'd be able to bring it down in our main phase 2 and like potentially pop their board if we wanted to. But even with that, going into the next turn, I think they still would have gotten to a point where they could have just killed us. I mean, we probably wouldn't have done card destruction there. I assume we wouldn't have. So maybe they would have had a different hand, but I still feel like we were in a tough spot. So we're going to go for a lure now. Banish that Demok. This actually was a pretty decent choice here because we could have potentially kept it in hand for the pre-mat here because especially since we have Rhoda, we can pitch the Demok for the Rhoda and then pre-mat it back. But I have to consider, like, what am I getting back in terms of spells here? And I don't really have any good ones yet. So I don't really feel the need to do that. I figure I can banish it here and then make Dim Fuse from them a bit less of a tempting proposition. So I'm just going to go for Rhoda for Stratos, search out the Disc Commander, set a return, and pass back to them. I also have return to bring it back when I so wish. So I feel like this is pretty good. And, this also pairs with the pre-mat in hand with the Disc Commander there. So I feel like this is a pretty decent play overall. The Gruffer might have been better, though, because I could go Gruffer, pitch Plasma, and then mill another thing. Maybe a Dark that I get back with pre-mat, potentially. But that gets me pretty close to the setup for Dad. But I feel like this is still fine. Let's see what they do, though. They're going to go for Rhoda, searching out a Stratos of their own. And then they're going to go for Stratos, search out another thing here. They're going to think about what to search, and they're ultimately going to search a Disc Commander. I think that makes a lot of sense. This card's very good. They're going to go for a D-draw, pitching that Disc Commander, drawing 2 more. And then they're going to go for Upstart, so we do gain 1,000 from that. And they're going to go for an alert here, drawing 2 more. So they're drawing a bunch here, which is a bit concerning. But that is what Dad return decks do. They got a lot of draw power. So they're going to go for another Upstart here. So we're at 10,000. It's tougher for them to actually kill us here. And they're going to crash into our Stratos here. So that one, pass back to us. We go for a Dark Gruffer. So Dark Gruffer is a perfect draw because that's sort of the other consideration that we were thinking about off the Rhoda, and now we got it. So we can make some things happen here pretty nicely. We don't have all the Darks we want engraved just yet, but we can get that pretty easily if we go Gruffer, pitch the Plasma to special summon that out, and then we go Gruffer, pitching a Disc Commander, and then sending a card from our deck to the graveyard. We probably want to go Norleras here. So, Norleras is an option, but I figure since we've got the Dad set up, we can go for a Dasher here. And actually, Dasher does get us to lethal this turn. So that's why I do this, because I'm like, if that back row is not anything like too serious, I've got 3 Darks engraved right now. I can go for Dad, pop that back row. If it's not, like, TT would be bad for us, but even if it's TT, we actually have follow-up because we can go for Phantom of Chaos, banish the Dasher, and then we can go return to, we can also pre-mat here to bring back like a Disc Commander. So basically the way we do this turn, we bring out Dark Arm Dragon, pop their back row. Even if it's TT, we've got plays because then we go Phantom of Chaos, banish the Dasher, get its effect, pre-mat back the Disc Commander, tribute that for the Dasher effect. And then we go return, bring back a Demock and a Disc Commander, and then we've got the pre-mat again, potentially bring back the Disc Commander, draw 2 more, potentially bring back the Stratos, get a search or a pop. Like, there's a lot of different ways we can play it, even if they TT us. And if they don't TT us, then we do all that plus a dad on board, right? So we should be winning here. We go for the dad, Prio, banish the Dasher. So actually, that's one way where we don't even need to use the Phantom of Chaos on that. So, it's pretty nice here. So we go for the back row. Unfortunately, it's Threatening Roar, and that's going to, cause a bit of problem for us. We go for the pre-mat here on the Disc Commander anyways, though. You might wonder why we're doing this. And the reason why we're doing this is because this does get us 2 draws. If we draw into something like Crush Card Virus, then that is very, very good against our opponent here. Gives us some follow-up potentially. And we actually do have the Kaiku here. And Kaiku is very annoying for my opponent potentially, because if they do bring out a dad, they can't actually use its effect until main phase 2. So it potentially protects us a little bit here from just being completely blown out. Unfortunately, our opponent does have a heavy, so that's going to wipe out our board. No point to doing the return because, it would be chain link 2, so the Demock would not actually get its effect off, and we'd just be paying half our life points for nothing, essentially. They're going to go for a Trooper here, milling 3, and that's going to be 1, 2, 3 Darks and Graves, so they do have enough for dad. And if they've got a dad in hand, that's going to be bad for us. And they do indeed have the dad. So they're going to bring it out. Just get aggressive with that. Attack over the Kaiku there. And, get rid of that. And then attack over the Greffer. And now that the Kaiku's gone in main phase 2, they can pop our dad with their dad. And that's going to be a bit annoying. Now, we do have the Phantom of Chaos. So we can use that to banish the dad, get its effect off. And that is pretty good for us. We also do have this Dark Creator here. And we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Darks Engrave exactly. So we can bring this thing out. I think I will indeed do this. So we're going to go for the Dark Creator, spill some of that thing out, and we're going to try to use its effect to, I think, bring back the Disc Commander. I think that makes the most sense to me here, because then we get more draws, potentially for a Snipe Hunter, but potentially just to see what we get here, maybe into like a Heavy Storm or something to protect our Phantom of Chaos a little bit, because Phantom of Chaos banishing dad is very, very good here. So we're going to draw to 2 trade-ins, so that's a bit, annoying here. And, if I was reworking this deck, if I cut the Norleras, I probably would cut the trade-ins as well. They are a draw engine here, but I don't really think this deck needs to, be deep drawing too much, honestly. Especially at the expense of paying, 45 cards. So, yeah, I don't know. They're just kind of awkward a lot of the time. But we're going to go for Phantom of Chaos, banish the Plasma. We could have banished the Dark Arm Dragon there instead. And that might have actually been the better choice overall, because we banished dad, and then we get to banish the Kaiku and the Plasma to pop both back row. We can then crash the Phantom of Chaos into their dad, and then attack the Dark Creator over the Card Trooper, and then attack directly with the Disc Commander. So I think that would have been ultimately the better option for us here. Unfortunately, I was just like, okay, well, I don't want to go too far down in Cards Engrave, so I'll just banish the Plasma now and try to suck up the dad and see how that goes. But I definitely should have banished the dad instead. Also, I was considering at the time, okay, what if we save the dad engrave for a later turn with Phantom? But if they've got a way to set up a board here, they're just going to attack over the Phantom, and then I won't get to use the effect there. I could bring it back with Dark Creator, but that does sort of limit the amount of Darks engrave even further, so then I can't get the dad pops as effectively. So I think this was a mistake on my part. I think I should have gone for the Dark Arm Dragon, but Plasma isn't bad, right? Plasma, I can still suck up that dad, take control of that, and then attack over their Trooper, and then attack directly for 300. I just do a fun little Phantom of Chaos poke. It doesn't do any damage because it, doesn't deal battle damage to the opponent, but, it's just funny to do. So I'm just going to then send the Dark Arm Dragon to the graveyard at the end phase, because the Plasma effect will wear off. So let's hope my opponent doesn't really have much here. But again, I did make a mistake, because if I'd gone for dad, I could have cleared those back row, and those back row could be live, and the return definitely is live there. So my opponent's going to go for a return, bring back a Greffer and a Sangan here, potentially allowing them to extend further into other plays. They do have exactly 3 Darks Engrave, so, they're probably not going to do any Greffer effects right now, but this is 2 monsters, so they can potentially tribute out like a Demock here, potentially, if they've got it. They're going to go for pitching a Crow and sending a Jinzo to get that engrave there. So that's set up for a revival, probably. And they're going to go for the pre-mat, pay 800, and bring back a Disc Commander here. So they're going to then draw 2 off that. Think about this a bit, and then tribute both those for a Demock. So they do indeed have the Demock, or at least they maybe drew into it. But they're going to add back that pre-mat. Now they can bring back the Disc Commander again if they want to do that. They could also just go for a Jinzo here and just get more aggressive. Search out a Crow, which is why they pitched the first Crow with the Greffer, because as long as they have 1 Crow in hand, they can stop our Phantom of Chaos shenanigans here. And they're they're going to think about this a bit and just attack over our Dark Creator. That gets banished. And now they can attack over our Phantom of Chaos, and that will get destroyed. So we lose 1,700. Now we're in an awkward spot, even if we draw into the Dark Creator. One, we don't have enough Darks in grave for the Dark Creator. But two, we can't even bring it out if we did because of this Disc Commander on our field. We have to have no monsters to bring out the Dark Creator. And now the Grepher, since it was summoned off return, will be banished here. So that will be gone. And it's a bit of an interesting thing to do here. I wonder why they didn't pre-mat. They could have gotten a bit more aggressive with the pre-mat, but I guess they were afraid that we had a crack back here. So I think it makes sense to hold the pre-mat, I guess, but definitely would have been a bit bad for us. But we're going to bring out the Snipe Hunter and try and use effect with priority, pitching this D-draw, because I figure looking at what has been gone through and like what's in grave and been used up, I feel like there are more level 8s left in our deck for trade-in than, Destiny Heroes for Destiny draw. Now, you could also argue that some of those level 8s left in deck are Dark Creators that I don't want to pitch here because I want to bring those out, which again is another issue, I think, with trade-in, where like if you're in a late game scenario, then you don't necessarily want to trade in anything except for the Norleras or Plasma. But Plasma is in here because it gives you access to trade in early because you go Stratos for Plasma into trade in, right? And Norleras is also a card that you ideally will not be drawing late in the game because you want to send it to grave pretty early. So I think the trade-ins are a bit awkward for there as well. So, my opponent's going to go for a Crow here on the Dad because I guess this is a... I wonder why they did that. I guess to get us off the 3 Darks in grave, but it's interesting that they did that after we went for our Snipe Hunter here. So, yeah, I'm not sure why they did that exactly, but I guess this does prevent us, if we have another Phantom Chaos play, prevents us from doing that. But, they're at 600 life points. I could attack in with the Disc Commander here, but I figure that I don't want to leave myself open to damage. And I figured, like, Snipe Hunter's on board. If this is uncontested next turn, then I can just pop whatever they bring out here. I'll have 3 cards to pitch for it. So the odds of missing all those is very, very low. And so I can just pop whatever monster they bring out if they've got a monster, or pop whatever back rows they've got if I'm worried about that. And then I can get in with lethal with the Snipe Hunter. So I figure I don't need the attack of the Disc Commander here. But, I mean, you might see something next turn that maybe I should have attacked with Disc Commander. I don't know. I think still in hindsight, like the theory behind it is correct. Do not attack with Disc Commander here. But I mean, this turn is something, and it's part of why I really don't like Snipe Hunter. I think it's good for this deck to play, right? Because it gets a bunch of Darks in grave for like Dark Creator setup, and it gets like your bricks in grave as well, which is where you want them. But I mean, this turn is oof. This is rough. So I go for Snipe Hunter, try and pop the monster, pitch a trade in, and just try and hit it. Unfortunately, I hit a 6. That happens sometimes. It's a 1/3 chance of missing that. So, I'm not too torn up about that. I figure, okay, I'll just get it next time. I go for the Snipe Hunter again, pitching for the Snipe Hunter effect, and I hit a 6 again. Okay, that's a bit unlikely, but I do have one more card in hand, so I can pitch that and pop that monster once and for all. It is a Rhoda, though, so this is a bit of an interesting decision. Do I go for Rhoda now, search out? I think Dark Grepher is the one monster left in my deck that can actually be searched out off Rhoda. It indeed is. So I search out a Grepher. I could pitch it to the Snipe Hunter deck then a little bit, but I think, honestly, in this sort of situation, I want to top that Grepher more than I don't because it's a monster that I can just attack in with, right? So I decide to ultimately just pitch the Rhoda without using the effect, which I do think is correct here. But I just got to pop that monster. This is potentially getting for lethal, and I miss again. So that's 3 6s in a row. That's, that's Snipe Hunter for you sometimes. So if I had attacked them with this commander last turn, I would have been able to kill them this turn. But again, there's no way I know that at the time, right? And like, I think it is better just to play more defensively here than not. But I switched to attack here because now I'm just drawing 1 card here. And if they do set another monster, like, I want to be able to get in for lethal. Even if I miss on 1, which is very, very likely, or at least more likely to miss on 1 card pitched than missing on 3 cards pitched. So I feel like that's fine, but luckily my opponent did not have what they needed to get out of that. And we managed to scrape by with that one on the back of Snipe Hunter. I mean, Snipe Hunter in popping DMOC was just an MVP there. But anyways, going into the game 3, we're going to see what happens here. They're going to go for Upstart, and they're going to go for D-Draw as well, drawing deeper into their deck. And then they're going to set 2 and pass back to us. So we draw into Allure. That's going to be pretty good. But Oppression is going to be less good for us. So that's a bit scary. Luckily, we do have Sangan here. So Sangan can just be Sangan, beat down for a bit. We're going to pitch this D-Draw here, draw 2 more. Pitching that Dasher. And then we actually have 2 Allure of Darkness. So this is a bit interesting because we could go for Allure here to try and draw deeper into an out for Oppression. We could also potentially just hold it for later because Sangan is a good enough thing on its own. It searches out another dark, which can then be allured away if we so wish. So we're going to go for the allure here and draw into a Mally and a Norleras. This is a bit interesting because we want Norleras in grave. We'd like to have Dad online potentially in case we do eventually, get an out to oppression or my opponent out to oppression on their own. Mally and grave is very good for D-draw. Sangan and Greffer we don't want to lose because they're sort of our beatdown strategy right now. And Demock's a bit awkward as well because we kind of want to just hard tribute that out later if we can, right? Because we might be able to. They didn't commit any monsters here right now, so they might not really have any normal summon monsters that they can use either. And so we managed to stick a Sangan, stick a Greffer, and then tribute out Demock later. Then we get pretty good value off that. So this is a bit of a thinker for us, and ultimately we decide to banish the Mally. And that may seem crazy, and maybe it is crazy, but my reasoning behind it is that, with that oppression up, Mally is not going to be as valuable as it would be otherwise. And, again, I want Norleras in grave. I want Dark-Armed Dragon for later in case we can potentially get rid of that oppression, which hopefully we will be able to. And I feel like we don't want to lose the Sangan, Greffer, or Demock, which can all be, summoned out later and get good value for us there. So I'm going to summon out the Sangan now, and I'm going to hold the second alert because I'm like, okay, I learned my lesson from the first one. I don't necessarily want to draw into this if I don't necessarily have the best banish for it. So I'm just going to set one. And we're going to go for another allure here. And I think this one is fine because we can lose a Greffer. Yes, it is good to have another body, but we do have a second one. So I think this is fine. We draw into Plasma. So honestly, Plasma is a good banish as well. Yes, the D-draw is getting defunded here because, it's just like less targets for it. But we can always search a Disc Commander off the Sangan or search the second Malicious off the Sangan as well. We can just also search a Stratos here, which I think is not a bad option. We're going to go for that. Now, you could argue that we should hold the Stratos in hand because if we get a hero out on board, then we can actually use Stratos' second effect to pop something. But most of those heroes are brought out by special summons. We don't necessarily want to just, hard summon a Disc Commander, have it be basically unprotected for a turn, and then summon out a Stratos to then pop the oppression. That seems like very, very fragile and not likely to succeed. So I'm just going to search the second Mally here, commit these Stratos, and just try and get aggressive with this. So I attack into the set. Unfortunately, it is a Spirit Reaper, so yeah, we can't really get through that. Yeah, so this is sort of just a stalemate at this point. My opponent's going to go for Upstart here. We gain 1,000. They're going to go for D-draw, pitching their own Mally, which luckily they can't really use under the Royal Oppression. They're going to go for another D-draw, pitching a Disc Commander this time. Now they got 3 Darks in grave, but they've got Oppression up, so they can't go for a Dad here unless they've got a way to out their own Oppression. So they're going to think about this a bit. And they're going to decide to summon out a Stratos here, and they're going to search out a Dasher here that will be able to allow them to get over what I've got, and they're going to Stratos into the Sangan. So we're going to get a search off that. We're going to search out a Phantom of Chaos, because Phantom of Chaos can actually use the graveyard effect of things. If we get actually like Norleras or the Dad in grave, then we can banish for Phantom of Chaos, pop the oppression that way. So that's pretty cool. And it makes things a lot better for us here. We draw a trade-in, so that gives us a little bit more draws. Unfortunately, Dad is a 7, not an 8, so we can't really pitch that for that. But we can pitch the Norleras and draw 2 more. So that's what we're going to do. Dim Fuse is not really the best for us here. And we don't necessarily want to go Phantom of Chaos, Norleras, pop the entire board. It might be the move, though. It might be what we have to do. So that might be worth doing. But, like, it is a bit unfortunate for us because, we have a really good hand here. Dim Fuse plus Demock is just busted, and we don't necessarily want to lose everything here. And that's kind of the risk of Phantom of Chaos, where, like, if you lose everything and you're in top deck mode afterwards, like, my opponent's going to have a normal summon before we will. They've got a lot of good stuff in grave. So, yeah, it's just a bit awkward here, but I might have to do it. I don't know. It's a bit interesting. I go for the Greffer because I think I am ultimately going to try and go for Phantom of Chaos, but I actually did see a line to play around just going for Norleras because, again, I don't necessarily want to pop all my setup. So if I go for Greffer's special summon effect to, pitch the Dad and try and bring it out, then my opponent, if they don't oppression it, I'm fine with that because I get a free body. If they do oppression it, they take 800. And I've got another Greffer in hand anyway, so I don't really care about that. And they will indeed oppression it. But now I've got the Dad in grave, so I can go for the Phantom of Chaos here. Go for Phantom of Chaos, target Dad, and unfortunately they've got a Crow. So, yeah, I mean, the Phantom of Chaos, not really going to do much here, but I can still crash into the Stratos there. And just leave the Phantom of Chaos out there. My opponent switches the Reaper to attacks over Phantom of Chaos. I won't lose a pitch from that. And then I can bring out Kaiku, get in for a bit of damage, and banish like the Disc Commander from grave, which could be pretty good. Although that would put them at 3 darks, but again, they've got oppression up, so they need to out their own oppression before they're able to bring in a Dad. Unfortunately, they got Sangan, so they're able to get a hand rip here, so they're able to attack into our Phantom of Chaos, go for the Reaper, and that will rip out a Dim Fuse, which is unfortunate, but like, you know, I probably feel like that's one of the better cards they could have ripped out. The other one would be like probably Mally. Demock again, I'd like to potentially get online later. But if I lost the Mally or the Dim Fuse, that's ultimately fine because I've got Greffer and Kaiku as just bodies here to bring out. We draw into another Dad. So unfortunately, we've got a fair amount of Darks in Grave. We got 5 right now. But again, if we draw into a Dark Creator and we've got the Oppression cleared, then the Dad is more likely of a scenario. We're just going to go for the Kaiku now and try and attack over this Spirit Reaper. But they've got a TT, so they're able to blow that up. They don't want to necessarily lose something like the, Disc Commander in Grave. I think that makes a lot of sense. And then they're going to pass back, or we're going to pass back to them, that is. They're going to go for an alert here, draw 2, banish the Dasher, and they're going to go for this Card Trooper here, milling 3, and those are 3 relatively good ones. Getting the Demock and Grave is obviously pretty good for them if they ever do find a way to out their own oppression. And then they're going to attack in for 19. So they're going to pass back to us. We draw away Snipe Hunter here. Snipe Hunter is a way to out the Royal Oppression, but like, what are we building towards? We can't bring out Dad here. So it's not really worth it right now to go for that. I could have brought up Snipe Hunter earlier off the Sangan as well if I wanted to. That might have been the better choice because then I could Snipe Hunter, try and pop the Oppression. I don't know. It would have been a bit tricky though because like by doing that, I feel like I would have gotten more Darks in Grave than I really wanted to. And yeah, if they had a way to out the Sniper, which we do know now that they did, then it still would have been bad for us there. So I don't know. It's a bit tricky, but maybe the Sniper would have been the better option because it plays around DD Crow a little bit better. But either way, I have it now, so I can potentially use it if I want to. But I'm going to hold it for later in case I need to pop the Oppression for other things. And I'm just going to pass back to my opponent here. So they're going to go for an alert, draw 2, banish a Crow, go for a Rhoda for a Greffer, and potentially be able to pop off with that. They're going to think about this a bit, and they ultimately do have the MST for their own oppression. So now things are getting scary because they can potentially pop off with that. They're going to go for a Greffer, pitching a Jinzo, milling a Dasher there. And then they're going to go for a Pre-Mat to try and bring back the Demock. So that will go through. We don't have Crow. And they're going to bring back Allure of Darkness. Bit of an interesting choice. But if you look at their graveyard, they don't really have the best spells there. So I think it makes sense. So they're going to try and draw into something good here. And they're going to go for Allure. Looks like a blind Allure because they set 2 before going for the Allure. And unfortunately for them, it will backfire because they will lose a Heavy, a Dim Fuse, and Alert. Dim Fuse being very good here. It means that if I clear the Demock once, they don't have a good access to it again. Return will be a way to access that, but outside of that, they don't really have a good way to do it. So they're going to attack over our Greffer, attack directly in with the Greffer that they've got there, and then pass back to us. We draw into a card destruction. Unfortunately, they've got Dust Shoot, so Dust Shoot will be able to take the Snipe Hunter away. Snipe Hunter is our way out of this. We try and snipe probably both back rows, and then snipe the Demock, just in case they had return set. But unfortunately, we lost that. So now we, have to do desperate times for desperate measures. Or the reverse of that, I guess. But we're going to go for card destruction here. Milling 3, or pitching 3, that is. Drawing 3. Norleras we can't summon. Destiny Draw is dead to us. And so it's just a Kaiku here. And that's not good. I mean, we have basically one option here, which is to summon out the Kaiku and attack into the Greffer. But it's not looking good for us. This is, not necessarily the best. So we attack in. We're not actually going to use the effect. That may seem crazy here. But I feel like it's not really worth it. They've used up Pre-Mat. If they've got Reborn, that's one thing, but I feel like it's more likely they've got some amount of returns in their deck. So we don't necessarily want to fuel a return. And unfortunately here, we are still dead to return because they've got a Crow and a Dasher here. So I'm going to try and set this back row as a bluff and hope that, they don't do anything with it, but it's not looking good for us here. They're going to attack in over the Kaiku there, and then they do indeed have the return, so they're able to bring back that Dasher and that Crow and get in for lethal damage here. So yeah, it's a bit of a rough one here. Repression is definitely a big hampering for this deck, even more so than other Dad return decks, because this one plays bricks like Norleras and bricks it played a fair amount of bricks, and the one way you unbreak your hand is with your Special Summon package and with things like that. And unfortunately, we weren't able to really do that. Now, again, as I mentioned, I think in the future it's probably better to cut the trade-ins in the Norlerases and the upstarts, add some Necro Gardenas in, and just build it that way. The deck is still vulnerable to DD Crow either way, but I do think that in a top deck war, you don't want to be playing this sort of thing because it's just very, very... I mean, it just basically comes down to luck at that point. And it's fine to have a deck like that. But I think, in order to make the deck a little bit more, competitive, it might be good to cut that out. But I don't know. This deck did do well in a tournament, so maybe I'm undervaluing the Norleras stuff. and I'm sort of like overly afraid of just, getting rid of all the progress of your own board. But I will say, I think this deck definitely needs some modifications and optimizations, and I'm curious to see what people will do to change it. Let me know what you would do to this deck down in the comments below. If you want to play games in this format or any other format that I feature on the channel, head over to the YGO from Zero Discord server, linked in the description down below. If you liked what you saw here, like, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff. We've only got one more video left of Dad Return format. That will be the eagerly awaited Gigaplant video, which should be a lot of fun. So look forward to that. And yeah, if you want to support me directly, I also have a Patreon linked in the description down below. And if you join the Patreon, you get shout out in these videos. So big shout outs to Rinsewin, Pork Tripkin, Bread Knocker, Tyler Compton, GeoMyFS, Dump Truck, Scout Zero, and Damon Hess. It means a lot that you all support and encourage me to make more videos like this one in the future. But I hope you all enjoyed as always. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off. Peace.